All right, back in the basement again today to talk about these two Cadillac bars, one produced by Kabuki, one produced by Rogue. And if you're not aware, Rogue has taken over production for Kabuki on this bar for the foreseeable future. And with that, there are a few slight changes with this bar with the one that Kabuki was making. So I just want to kind of talk about it because you've probably read it or seen it. I just want to talk about what those differences actually feel like in use. And I think the thing that appealed most to me and most of you is the fact that Rogue was now knurling the handles on here. And there was no really way to get knurled handles on a Cadillac bar in the past, unless you're extra bougie and went the route of removing handles and welding in new ones. And that's one of the reasons that I bought the Rogue MG4 and MG4 CN, is because you could actually put in like stainless steel handles and get some good knurling and whatever the case may be. So hearing that Rogue was adding knurling to this bar was, in my opinion, one of the biggest bright spots. Now, the thing is true, it does have knurling, but it's what I would consider your typical specialty bar knurling, which means it feels somewhat like an afterthought to me. It's there, it's not really aggressive, and it's powder coated on top of it. So yes, it's knurled, but again, nothing that you would say like, wow, that's a really aggressive bar. On the flip side, the original Kabuki bar, while not knurled, actually uses some very textured, gritty powder coat, which I'm a big fan of because it literally grabs onto anything, as you can probably tell from all the dead skin and rub marks that it has all over it. But that being said, it offers a really good grip throughout the course of the bar and throughout the course of the frame because the frame is powder coated in that same very grippy, textured powder coat. Now with this, I've had this bar for over a year. And before that, someone else owned it. I bought this bar secondhand and I got a nice price break because of it. But I've never had any issues with this kind of textured powder coat wearing down in that time because I have heard that as a complaint from other people, have not seen that personally. And I actually think that the textured powder coat offers more grip than the knurled version on here. Now, speaking about the handles themselves, another thing that really appealed to me was the fact that they were advertised as having bigger handles. But when you take a look at the numbers, it doesn't seem that much bigger, especially if you're looking at inches, because we're talking about point decimals of an inch. But when we talk about millimeters, which we typically do when we talk about gripping a barbell shaft, it's about a 2 millimeter increase from old version to new version. So old version roughly 32, new version roughly 34. That's about the same difference as going from a deadlift bar at 27 millimeters to a power bar at 29, which I think is pretty significant. But truth be told, once we started getting into these higher numbers on 32 millimeters, it's like going from a 32 millimeter squat bar to almost a 35 millimeter squat bar, which in that case, you're already dealing with a bigger diameter. I think there is a point of diminishing returns in that regard, so it doesn't feel as pronounced. Now, I do like the 34 millimeters better, given the choice, but I like the textured powder coat more. So if I had to choose between these two handles as is for the perfect Cadillac bar, I would go 34 millimeters with a textured powder coat because, again, I feel like this is more grippy overall. Now, there are also some changes in the handle spacing, but they're so minuscule. Again, I don't think they make much of a difference, if any. I never had any issues with the distance between the handles, nor have I heard of anyone having issues, so it's just one of those things that was done. But again, I don't think if you're using either one of these bars or going back to back with them that you would say, wow, this one bar is a lot better because the handle spacing is different. Now, one thing that might really appeal to people as well are these center X's here. So the Kabuki version, as you can see here, it's a little bit less pronounced than the Rogue version. I'll show you some B-roll or some pictures to kind of give you a better idea. It is less pronounced on the top version, and it is also centered in the frame, whereas the Rogue version is more pronounced and is also in line with the frame. So it's more of a smooth edge. So if you're actually using a full range of motion when you're pressing with this bar, which surprisingly enough, I don't find that I do a ton, nor do a lot of people that I see from watching other video reviews of this bar, which I think is due to the camber angle and people's shoulder mobility. If you are resting this bar on your chest or touching your chest, maybe for things like rows, this is going to be a little bit more comfortable because you're not going to deal with all of the sharp edges that are throughout the course of this bar in the frame. I talked about that in previous videos, that this bar is literally a guillotine in some cases because of the 90-degree sharp angle in metal. That is still persistent here on the Rogue version, but the biggest portion where you'd ever touched yourself for the most part, which sounds really terrible to say, is going to be more comfortable than the older version. But otherwise, the frame remains mostly the same design. The only other change I could really find out is the way that it's welded here on the edges. The Rogue uses more of a beveled design. And again, you have those sharp 90-degree angles here. And it's just like a slot and tab design that they put in. So otherwise, the frame remains largely untouched. Now, a big difference here as well that doesn't have much to do with anything. You can see the Kabuki version uses these bolts that go through both of these sleeves. The Rogue version does not. Single bolts here only. Kabuki version, a little bit easier to tighten down just because there's more space between this and the handle than there is between this and this, like on the Rogue version. But again, it doesn't actually decrease any functionality or weight capacity of the bar because the sleeve itself is still passing through there, so you do have that support in place. Now, in my particular Kabuki version, this is a little bit of an older one because on a newer Kabuki version produced by Kabuki, they actually have these bolts recessed, as you can find on the Rogue one. So mine is older, and you can tell because the bolts still stick out. If you have a tight rack, like something that's 47 inches wide, like Rep Fitness or Sorinex, that's gonna give you a couple more millimeters of space, maybe like 1/4 of an inch, which if you add both sides, about 1/2 an inch, so it does help in that regard. But again, nothing that would make or break between these two if really trying to compare apples to apples. Otherwise speaking, the sleeves themselves are very similar. You still have a rib sleeve here. The only thing that I would consider a downgrade between these two bars is when you went from the original Kabuki to the new Rogue version, is you're losing that really iconic stamped end cap that Kabuki traditionally supplies with their bars. For Rogue, you're getting their end caps, which look okay, but in time can actually rub with that snap ring and start coming off. The Kabuki ones are a lot better in that regard, and I wish that they would continue that on throughout the course of this bar. So overall, comparing the old to the new, yes, there are changes, but on paper, to me, they were a lot more appealing than when I actually got them in my hand to use them and bench and press and row and do anything that you would do with this bar. This bar does everything that this bar can do, but I think the big selling point of this bar for many people is the fact that Rogue is now producing it. It means a couple of things. Number one, you're not gonna have to deal with the long lead times that is really associated with Kabuki. Case in point, if you wanted a Transformer bar, still produced by Kabuki, the lead time currently sits at 17 to 19 weeks. This bar from Rogue is in stock and shipping and probably will be at your door within 5 business days, no matter where you are in the country. And because Rogue does so much shipping, if you were to buy both of these bars brand new at any given time, even though the MSRP is the same on them, Rogue shipping is pretty much $20 to $30 cheaper in some cases than this bar here. So you're gonna be getting a price break in that regard. So Rogue taking over in that regard is good. Some of the actual features and functionality of this bar, while different, I wouldn't say is necessarily an improvement. It's going to boil down to personal preference, but that's going to help arm you, hopefully, if you are looking at these bars and maybe you find this one secondhand at a price break, and know that in my opinion, it's probably not worth paying full price for the newer version for some of the features that they added in, because this bar is still fantastic as is. Hopefully that helps you. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. Or do you think I'm wrong? Do these changes really make that much of a difference? In the meantime, as always, thanks for watching and stay big.